What if what you're holding on to is slowly killing you? My friend, it's time to blow that up. I'm Sarah Stansberry, coach, author, and recovering codependent. And on this podcast, you'll learn to break free from people pleasing, heal from relationship wounds, and move beyond anxiety and self-doubt. Because sometimes you need to destroy what isn't working to build something beautiful. Welcome to How to Blow Up Your Life. Hello, everybody, and welcome to How to Blow Up Your Life. As you know, I am your host, Sarah Stansberry, and I'm coming to you kind of live from my living room in New York City. Now, as you know, I have been working a lot this past year. I've launched a Substack and I've written a book, and now I've got this podcast. And I talk a lot in general about codependency because for me, that is a really big deal. If you know me, you realize and know that codependency is a really big part of my story. In fact, I've been in codependency recovery for more than 15 years now. I've also been sober for almost that long. However, my sobriety from alcohol, which was kind of the only thing I used, was not my biggest affliction. My biggest affliction had to do with my relationships and how I would overperform in relationships to essentially get people to love and like me, if that makes sense. So, over this past year, I've been working with a lot of different kinds of people from all walks of life in order to build these things that I've built. And what I'm realizing, I've worked with editors, producers, tech people, you name it. And I'm starting to get a lot of just basic questions about codependency. People want to know what it is. They want to know what it looks like, how it shows up in life. They ask me questions like, oh, my friend is financially dependent on their partner for money, and so they're codependent. I do my partner's laundry. Am I codependent or are they codependent on me? Things like that. What I'm discovering is that there's a little bit of misunderstanding about what codependency really is. And so I thought that I would take some time and explain how I see it and how it has shown up for me in my life, and also how it still shows up for me in my life. Because if you're in recovery and you know you're doing the work, you know that the work never ends. And I'm so sorry about that, but it is true. However, the work does get easier and it gets more rewarding because the more you do it and the more you commit your life to it, the better your life gets. And so it's almost like kind of an instant reward. And it becomes, once you figure that pattern out, you realize how worthwhile the work is, if that makes sense. So I want to take you through the definition of codependency, and the way people refer to it has actually kind of changed and morphed a little bit since I began recovery all those years ago. When I first started all of this, a codependent was essentially the other half of an addicted relationship. In fact, they would use the term, even in recovery meetings and in therapy, the term codependent and co-addict were used pretty much synonymously, if that makes sense. So you could refer to yourself as a codependent, as a co-addict. Everybody would know what you were talking about, and they would know what it was, and that's just kind of what it was. The reason it was defined this way, as like the other half of an addicted relationship, or the other half of the other person in a relationship that had addiction there, was because it was kind of described as the person with the addiction was addicted to the substance, and the codependent or co-addict was addicted to the relationship with the addict. Um, what does that mean? That means that, and bear with me here, the addict's God was the vice, and the co-addict's God was the addict. Co-addicts, codependents are known to contort themselves. They give parts or all of themselves up for the sake of the relationship with the addicted person. They bend in all kinds of ways just to make the relationship with the addicted person, the person struggling with addiction, work. What does this look like? It could mean many, many different things. It can mean that the person with codependency makes excuses for the person struggling with addiction. They deny that there is a person struggling with addiction. They put their head in the sand because the codependent needs the relationship to work in order to be okay, if that makes sense. Fast forward, I don't know how long, but they have done more and more research on codependency and basically just trying to figure out where it starts, where it comes from. And what they're learning is that codependency is actually its own form of a trauma response. And so, if you understand trauma, which you don't even really need to understand trauma to understand this, but essentially, what they're finding is that children who grow up in households that are dysfunctional or households that have some sort of an addiction problem in it are not getting their needs met, either physical needs, mostly probably though emotional needs, by the parents, because the parents either are so wrapped up in the addiction, co-addiction cycle and making everything right for the person struggling with addiction, or maybe the parents aren't emotionally mature enough themselves to offer that emotional support to the child. So the children essentially are experiencing emotional neglect, sometimes physical neglect, but I'm going to talk about emotional neglect. The child understands this on some level. You know, it's unlikely that they understand this on a they're aware of this, but they know that there's something desperately missing. They know that they need the love and the care of their parents. And so children, what they do in their infinite coping wisdom, in their wise child selves, they think, okay, well, I need to do something to make this better so that I can survive. So, what they begin to do is they begin to caretake their parents in such a way that it might be possible that if they take care of their parents enough, then the parents will in turn be able to be okay enough to take care of the child. And therefore, the child will survive. Are you with me? Okay. So, codependency really, instead of the other half of an addicted relationship, is really a trauma response. Now, because of the nature of the trauma response and the fact that the trauma response essentially it manifests in this place where I'm going to do whatever it takes to make this relationship work. That's why codependents probably typically end up getting together with people struggling with addiction. Does that make sense? So it's not that they became partnered with this person and then became a codependent. My guess is they were already codependent and found the idea of a dysfunctional person very attractive to them because it reminded them of their family of origin. And the belief is that I can just make this better. I can do enough. I can do more than my share. I can make this relationship work because my very livelihood and my existence, is bound to this relationship working. What that does, of course, is it's a perpetuation of a very unhealthy cycle that codependents get themselves into, where they are taking on too much responsibility, more than their share of responsibility in relationship. They are taking on too much and more than their share of emotional responsibility, of physical labor, of the mental load, of the things like family rearing. And it could even be, it could even be like earning more money and the other person isn't working, even though they need to work to make ends meet, kind of a thing. It can look all different ways. And as you know, if you do not heal your unhealthy patterns of behavior, they just perpetuate and continue on over and over. And which is why it's so important that we heal those childhood wounds that have caused the codependency and the trauma response in the first place. So, talking about people ask me a lot, this one about money, it comes up a lot in conversations with people. Like, oh, my sister is dependent on her partner for money. She's so codependent. And I want to say very loudly that's not necessarily the case. A codependent person, it's not that they're counting on the other person really to meet their need really in any way. The codependent person is the one who's extending themselves or overextending themselves in an unhealthy way in order to make the relationship work, if that makes sense. Like if you've got a partnership and one of you is earning money and the other one is not earning money, and that's what you've agreed to do because that's what it works out. That's how it works out best for your partnership. That that's not a codependent relationship. That's what I would call an interdependent relationship, which is that's really what you strive for. Okay, that's like the gold standard where both partners kind of come together and they each give the same amount, not necessarily in the same area, but they each give the same amount of effort, work, whatever you've decided that partnership needs to succeed. And each partner is giving equally. A codependent relationship looks like one person working and they've decided that both people need to work in order to pay the bills or what have you, but one of the partners can't keep a job, they won't keep a job, they won't look for a job. They just decided on their own that they're not going to work, which forces the other partner to get a second job or third job or whatever to keep up the slack. Does that make sense? Okay. So you have healthy interdependence, unhealthy codependence. You want to avoid unhealthy codependence. Now, it can be in many other ways besides financial, too. It can be, like I said, in the mental load of taking care of the children, or it could be like the household chores, whatever you have decided, you know what, this is how we're going to establish this relationship. I'm going to be in charge of XYZ, and you're going to be in charge of ABC. And that's how we're going to live interdependently and have like a healthy way of being. But the person who is responsible for ABC decides they or really can't do ABC because they have an addiction that is taking them away from being able to accomplish ABC. Well, when the partner who's responsible for XYZ sees this, instead of allowing the natural consequences to occur, they want to rescue their partner, which essentially keeps allowing the person who's struggling with addiction to continue to do so. And that is called enabling. So when you are doing for somebody else something that they're perfectly capable of doing for themselves and has agreed to do, and you're doing it for them, that is called enabling. And a lot of families who struggle, who have addiction inside the family unit, experience this because in order for the person with the addiction to keep in the addiction, everybody else in the family has to contort or do whatever they need to do to make the rest of the family unit work. Does that make sense? So if the person struggling with addiction can't be anywhere on time, and so you don't make a commitment to be anywhere because you just don't know if you can count on them, that would be enabling. If you are supposed to show up at a dinner party with your spouse and the spouse, like, no call, no show, you don't know what, and this is a regular thing that happens, and you find out, oh, they, were at the bar, they were doing, or maybe you just don't even know where they were. And you make excuses for them, like, oh, they're working late. Oh, they got the time mixed up. There's traffic, whatever. That's enabling, because you're essentially taking what's the responsibility of one person and you are assuming that responsibility. And that is what codependents do. And because they do that, it means they're willing to sacrifice their very soul in order to keep the relationship going. Because somewhere in their psyche, in the wounded, trauma experienced inner child, they think, if I don't do whatever I need to do to hang on to this relationship and it ends, then I might die too. Now that's super deep, I know, but that's essentially what's going on. So again, you want healthy interdependence. You do not want unhealthy codependence. I hope that clears a few things up and just kind of level sets what each are. There's so many resources on my website to buy books. There's lots of things I've written about this. You're welcome to look in the show notes and we'll point you to those links and ways that you can get, more information on this if you feel like you might be in a codependent relationship, or somebody that you love might be in a codependent relationship, just so you can educate yourselves and just get more information. So when we're talking about healing codependency, what we're really talking about is putting the focus on ourselves and our own happiness and also our own behavior. And we're focusing on making ourselves happy and fulfilled instead of expecting the other person's behavior to make us happy and fulfilled. Because at the end of the day, no one should be responsible for making you happy but you. All right, friends, go out, learn what you can learn. I hope this has been helpful. I hope that you've learned a little bit and maybe have gotten a couple of answers. Look at my website for more details and information, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to How to Blow Up Your Life. If you like this show, please like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it, and it helps more than you know. You can join me on Substack at sarahstansberry.substack.com, where we continue these conversations. You can also follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Sarah Stansberry. This podcast is produced by Shout More Quietly Productions. Music by Jay Ferris. All links and information are in the show notes. Now go forward and blow up your life.